Hi everyone, it's DeanBrigs. I want to pray with inspiration from Deuteronomy chapter 1, where Moses basically undertakes to explain the history of Israel up to that point, to remind everyone their long history, being delivered from Egypt, ransomed, sent to the promised land, and yet in failing to enter in, condemned to wander for a period until the faithless generation had died off. And then in Deuteronomy 1, Moses is telling the people, he's undertaking the task of revisiting that whole history. And he says in verse 5 or 6, you've been at this mountain long enough. And a few verses down, he says, now go take the land. In all of our lives, we have mountain circling, wilderness wandering moments. And they serve a purpose. They serve to show us the fruitlessness of faith, of the fruitlessness of faithlessness, of unbelief, and also to make us sick enough of wandering around in circles that we finally say, I would rather risk dying in pursuit of the promise than living comfortably in the barrenness and futility of another trip around the mountain. And so I believe there's something God is doing right now in the earth. I think he is raising up overcomers, people with an overcoming spirit. He's raising up the Calebs and the Joshuas who, long after weathering the storms of unbelief in a generation of unbelief, Caleb at 80 years old is saying, I'm as strong as I was when we were condemned to wander, and I haven't got my land yet. Give me the hill country. And he's committed to fighting the giants and doing what's necessary to possess his promise. Well, we're gathering at WPA with hundreds and even thousands of others from across Australia and across Oceania. I'm coming from Kansas City, Missouri, because I believe this gathering matters. I believe it matters to the Lord. I believe it matters for Australia. I believe it matters for the nations of Oceania. And I believe it matters for the earth to set in place. Each region of the earth, I believe, has redemptive callings. I think there's a wave of glory, a tsunami of purpose that God has that is a part of his plan and strategy at the end of the age. And so we want to lay hold of that. We don't want to be people that just keep moving around the mountain. So God, I ask, show us with clarity. God, give us a vision of the promise that you have for Australia and Oceania. God, I'm asking for a vision to be released, even in these final weeks leading up, that people would be awakened with dreams, that they would be troubled with untapped potential, that unbelief would fall aside, the sin that so easily besets, the great tendency of the human heart to water down the dream of heaven, to water down and explain away the radical possibility that God means exactly what he said in his word, and he will do exactly what his word says. And so God, we ask for the full promise of awakening in our generation, the full promise of sweeping revival, Holy Spirit outbursts on the streets, in businesses, in shops, far beyond the confines of the church. We ask for an awakening among your people, and an awakening that thrusts forth your people to go and do and be the mouth and eyes and ears and hands of Jesus to a lost and hurting generation. We're asking for salvation. We're asking for miracles. We're asking for healing. We're asking for deliverance. We're asking for laws to change and nations to be reformed and discipled and to be among those who would stand before the throne one day as entire people groups that the Lord would call sheep nations, good and faithful servants, fit for the King's glory and pleasure. God, we want to be those people now. We want to look at our promise now and possess our promise now. So we look with eyes of faith. We read in your word. We interact with one another and stir one another up to good works. We remember prophecies given to us personally and corporately and imparted to us by the laying on of hands, spiritual gifts that have lain dormant, corporate purpose that has grown weary. We ask for financial breakthrough, relational breakthrough, healing in marriages, homes, and righteousness to dominate and demonstrate the values of our glorious King across the nations of Oceania. Let all the islands be swept up as the waters as the knowledge of God covers that part of the earth like the waters that surround all those islands. God, do it. Do it. Do it in our day. And even now begin stirring faith and intercessory burdens for how we can come together.